Let's see, we got 1, 2. Oh, there's Fran. Hey, Fran. I'll just wait another minute or so here. It looks like we got 3. We need another 2.
There we are. Hi, sorry, I had trouble connecting today. I think I'm here now.
We can hear you.
Woohoo!
Waiting on Andrew or Mark to hop in. The chat, Chad, you're muted there.
Which Mark was not going to be able to attend?
Mark Grimbremmer.
Ah. And Bob should be here as well, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Looks like Bob is joining now.
Oh, perfect. Hey, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
How y'all doing?
Great.
Hey, Bob, are you on the standing? Yeah, you are on there. Okay. I was just making sure we updated your email to the standing calendar invite.
Yep.
Okay, I think we need one more so we have the majority here. We have a quorum. 2, 3, 4. Should be Andrew or
Andrew
Mark
is
Stewart.
right.
Oh, there we go. All right, Chad, whenever you're ready to call to order.
Great. So calling to order the regular private forest accord mitigation advisory committee meeting for Tuesday, January 9th. We'll begin with roll call and approval of the agenda. So with that, Andy, would you please lead roll call?
Yes, please respond in the affirmative if you're present. Chad Washington.
Present.
Kristen Rivard.
Present.
Keith Curtis. Fran Cafferata.
Present.
Andrew Perkey.
Present.
Mark Stern. Bob Salinger.
Present.
Mark Grimbremmer. Jennifer Weichel.
Here.
Kate Wells. Sam. Right?
Hi, Andy.
Sam Bankston.
Yeah. Kate's planning to attend, but is running a little late. She had a meeting to wrap up.
Okay. I'll say Sam in proxy. Chris Allen.
Present.
Sarah Gregory.
Present.
Mark Stern. Looks like Mark's absent. Well, Chad, we do have a quorum, so we can move forward. You're muted there, Chad.
Thank you, Andy. So next we will approve the consent agenda. Well, I guess next we'll approve the agenda as provided for this meeting. There any comments? Okay. We'll just say that's approved and move to the consent agenda, which consists of our meeting minutes from the November meeting. Andy sent that out, I believe, on the 5th. Has everyone gotten a chance to review the meeting minutes from the November meeting? Great, I see heads nodding. Were there any asks for any corrections or additions? None, all right. So we will consider the meeting minutes approved and move into item 3. Andy, did we have anybody register for public comment?
We didn't have anyone registered, but as always, we can take public comment at this time if anyone wants to raise their hand virtually. We can call on you.
Great.
Give it a minute here. We're asking for public comment for those who are joining in. Now's an opportunity to raise your hand virtually if you'd like to be called on for public comment.
You know, Andy, I'm not seeing anything, so we can go ahead and continue. Looks like our next item is the staff report, updated by you, Andy. So can you please provide the staff report?
Great, happy to. Moving forward. Well, hopefully everyone had a good winter break. It was nice to take a break in the middle of the holiday season. Glad to see everyone back here and on camera. Appreciate the time. Don't have too much of a staff update, but we'll get right into it. Sorry, I'm looking off screen at some notes here. First off is just a reminder of the 2024, the in-person meeting coming up next month, end of February, last day of February, first day of March. That's a Thursday, Friday. That meeting is going to select projects for recommendations to Fish and Wildlife Commission for our first round of funding, which is exciting. So the meeting is going to take place at in Salem at ODF&W's headquarters in the commission room. It is open to the public. I will be sending out an agenda probably early next month. We will not have our normal February standing meeting. That will take place instead. Tiffany is on point is the point of contact for meeting logistics. So I believe she's reached out to schedule hotels with everyone, confirm food options. I believe she's going to be reaching out again shortly to all of you for some lunch options. We're going to be providing a few meals throughout it, and she'll confirm that with you. As a reminder, that first night, as a committee and the stream bios will be going out and having dinner after our first meeting, later in the evening. Let's see what else. Yeah, that's about it for the in-person update. And I just wanted to have a quick note. I think I saw Kate Wells come in and join the meeting. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. No problem. Just going to mark that present. I wanted to do a reminder. I sent out in my staff update or the staff report 2024 topics, meeting topics. Those are just a rough estimate at this time. So feel free to mull that over. Just a short list of topics, but we're happy to take any more recommendations for this year to discuss. If you guys have any ideas, feel free to ping me, give me a call, or incorporate it. We are going to try to host our first field trip to one of our funded projects at some point this year, which is pretty exciting. We're looking at either a mid to late summer, so like maybe in August, early August, or a winter, because it looks like we might be doing like a winter break in December, so maybe we'll go to a field trip there or something. It's just really gonna have to time well with when we get contracts out and funding. And how far along one of the projects are. But that's exciting. So we're trying to do that. I am going to chat next about the grant solicitation as like an official agenda item. But before I get into that, did anyone have any questions about the staff update I just gave with like the in-person meeting or 2024 topics? Now's the time we can kind of chat about it. All right. We are moving fast today, real fast today, actually. I think the next agenda item is me presenting again, right? Get that ready here.
Grant solicitation recap.
We're just waiting for this, Andy. This is the big moment. So
I appreciate that. It is. My screen should be coming in now. Hopefully you guys can see this. I think I'm seeing some nodding heads. All right. It is a big moment. I'm going to get right into it. You guys all got some like more data, and we're happy to talk about it now too. This is an opportunity. We do have the time. We had 74 submissions, which is just a huge success. We had over $43 million requested in funding. So, I'm happy to report the inaugural year of the grant program was a huge success. It demonstrates the need for funding in Oregon from programs such as this and clearly validates the program's success in addressing a critical gap, in our opinion, across the state of Oregon. Applications encompass a diverse range of organizations from private companies to local groups like watershed councils and tribal representatives. Proposals targeted a variety of HCP covered species. Many proposals originated from east of the Cascades, which was a little bit of a surprising note, which is good to see, and Southwest Oregon, demonstrating that local interest and commitment. My staff report did give a bit of a deeper dive. I gave you guys some raw data as the committee members to look through at your leisure if you would like. But overall, I'm very pleased. We're very pleased with this first offering and the interest of it. So we are now in the review stage, which I'm going to talk about next more officially. But so before we get into that, did anyone have any kind of discussion they wanted to have or questions about what was submitted at this point? As a quick reminder, we were talking about upwards of $10 million in funding for this first solicitation based on what comes in. So Chad, I'll hand it back to you to facilitate any discussion about this first round. If 10 million is the number we want to stick with, if anyone had any questions about more details from the stats too, I'm happy to give that.
Great. Thanks for that, Andy. Just begin by saying I think it's really encouraging to see the diversity of project types, the diversity of project applicants, as well as representation from both the east and west side of the state. I would open it up now if anybody else would like to raise their hand virtually to provide comment or ask questions. Looks like Jennifer's got her hand up.
Let's second. Ahead of sorry, forgot your name.
Chris.
So sorry. Anyway, just really quick, if you have this off the top of your head, Andy, what was the range in dollar amount requested on like a per project basis, lowest and smallest? Just to get an idea of the scope. I haven't looked through the spreadsheet yet.
No, don't worry about it. I have it right here. So the lowest was $43,000 from Tillamook area. The largest, oh, I scrolled too much. Just a second. Is 6.9 million. The step down from that largest, just to give a frame of reference, was 3.7 million. So we're really looking at 43,000 and 3.7. I apologize, I didn't give an average funding. That would have been a good statistics to have. But it looks like we're in averagely the 1 to 200 or 1 to 300 range.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Looks like Chris, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, just a comment. I haven't spent a lot of time looking over the spreadsheet you sent out, Andy, but looking at the requesters, it did jump out to me that there was only one application submitted from a tribe, and just given the amount of submissions and dollar amounts requested, it was clear clear that ODFW in particular, but all of us involved here did a lot of outreach, and that shows here. But I'm just wondering, given that there was only a single tribe that applied for funding, we might want to, and given that the tribes are such unique partners, we might want to have a little more focused outreach, working with tribes to make certain that they're aware of this opportunity in this new grant program at ODFW.
Yeah, we agree with that, Chris, and that's definitely on our short list next year. Thanks for bringing that up.
Andrew, looks like you've got your hand up as well.
Yes, thanks, Chad. Given our extensive discussion about acquisitions, I'm curious to know, and again, I haven't looked at the spreadsheet yet, how many acquisition requests there were.
Well, I would hope that there weren't any, given that that wasn't the project type that we were going to be funding this round.
That's right. We were explicit that we were passing on that this round.
Yes.
Right.
No acquisition type.
Yeah, I had forgotten that we were explicit. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, so projects stuck around planning, implementation, some stakeholder engagement. You know, a lot of planning and implementation projects, a lot of shovel on the ground kind of stuff, which is great for this grant fund. We got some good feedback from applicants and about process improvements for next year and what we can do to streamline this. But overall, people seem pretty happy and excited about this kind of grant opportunity, and hopefully the flexibility of it too.
Great. Looks like Mark Stern, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, hi. Apologies for being a few minutes late. We had a contractor stop by and cut into that. I get the question I had, and maybe you guys have already talked about it. I just wondered from the covered species that we had, that there seemed to be pretty good spread across the covered species, or focus on some and not others. And again, if you've already talked about it, apologies, but that's one question that came to my mind.
No, we didn't actually. You actually hopped on at a pretty good time, Mark. So yeah, I would say there was a good amount of salamander projects also, which was nice to see. I think that was a little bit of a concern from some of us in the beginning. As expected, there was a lot of trout-based projects. I would say it was a relatively good spread on it at the end of the day. Like I said, I was a little surprised to see Eastern Oregon. But yeah, I'm looking right now at the species. A lot of coastal.
There was about 21 applicants that listed coastal giant salamander, tailed frog, or torrent salamanders as the Habitat Conservation Plan covered species anticipated. So that's pretty good. That's roughly a third, a little less than a third of the applicants. Bull trout was about 5 of the 75, which I think that's pretty good given bull trout range. And then the rest were pretty much native salmon and trout.
Yeah.
Bob, you got your hand up.
Sorry, just finding my microphone. Yeah, no, I was really excited to see so many that listed the salamanders. I think it's a little deceptive though, in that I think in a lot of those they're kind of an add-on. They're in the same place, but they're fairly fish-centric projects. So I think it's just something to keep an eye on. I'm glad people are noticing them, but I think it's probably a place that we want to kind of dig down a little bit and make sure that they really are thinking about them, and it's not just that they're there and they're kind of captured incidentally. So some of them are clearly doing more than that too. So I don't want to understate that either. So.
Great point. Well, thank you for that, Bob. All right. Any other questions or comments? Comment in the chat from Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen, for that.
Looks like the average dollar request was around 585,000 with a median of 304,000. Those are helpful statistics. Thank you for that, Kristen.
So I guess, Chad, I'd like to point to you for a discussion would be just confirming, we're going to go over the review process next and how we're going to form some packets for recommendation for funding. But before we get to that point, just want to confirm that $10 million is that our hard line then for this first round? Is $10 million?
I feel like that is still a reasonable number, Andy, and that leaves a little bit left to distribute. I don't think we need to distribute everything, right?
Sounds good. Just wanted to kind of confirm that before we move on. Great.
Well, we can open that up for discussion. And I guess I would ask the other committee members to weigh in either with support that we stay with the 10 million or comments to the contrary, but just to make sure that everybody is engaged here, I just would like everybody to, either a thumbs up or looks like Mark, you've got a comment.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I was just trying to picture, we anticipate the next RFP would be basically next fall sometime, sort of on this 12-month cycle we have, or we're beginning to have, it appears. So there'd be 10 million that comes up in the fall. And will we also have another 2.5 million, or when does that show up, so to speak? So I guess I'm just trying to see what our timeline is out. And then the other thought I had, I guess, is I don't know if the department has any awareness of, or any of you do, of other special requests that may come in, or Andy, if you've gotten a sense if there'll be any urgent requests that for whatever reason didn't make this timeline but might make the others.
Yeah. So yeah, if you don't mind, Chad, I'll kind of answer some of those questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
So first is, yeah, we have 10 million now. We do expect to have 12 million in limitation later this year. So you are right. And then by our next solicitation, Mark, we will have another about 10 or 12 million available for funding. And that does look like to be in the fall. Again, we have a lot of process improvement to do, one of which is urgent grant creation. So that process, as we talked about, I believe in our November meeting, we said we'll just hold off on urgent grants until we get through this first round of funding, which is expected to be end of March when we get through commission. I am hoping to be working on the urgent grants within the next few months here. So we've had a few, is what I'm getting at, a few requests, and I've told them, please, reapproach us after March so we can reevaluate and go forward. Like you said, we only have this much money, so it's however we want to use it. We can use it all now or save some of it, kind of thing.
Andy, on the urgent requests, did those come through then with the standard solicitation? Were those urgent grants now showing up in the standard process?
It's ad hoc, so they're kind of emailing me. I think that's how it's prescribed right now in the grant guidelines. If you have an urgent request, email me directly. Or we have a PFA grants email set up. That's how they come through.
And so did you direct them to the standard application process while that solicitation was open? Okay.
Yeah, that was exactly what it is, especially if it was relevant. But yeah, we said, hey, we have this open now. Please come into here. We still need to create the process because we have entire process from submission, review, approval for urgent grants to still fish out.
Very good. I think another comment that Mark had made, I'd like to clarify a little bit, is the comment around a 12-month solicitation cycle or an annual solicitation. And I think we had discussion around a semi-annual solicitation. We were going to get through this first solicitation process, determine the workload and the ask from the committee and other agencies that are supporting the process, and then make a determination whether we want to offer these annually or semi-annually. And Kristen, you had some comments that I thought were really helpful around some of the benefits of semi-annual solicitations regarding project quality. And if you'd like to share some of those thoughts that you have shared earlier, you would be welcome to. If it feels like I'm putting you on the spot, don't feel like you have to.
Yeah, my memory may be failing me some of what those comments were, to be honest, Chad, but if the workload is feasible, and I want to be really sensitive to what we're asking of partners and supporting this, particularly reviewers from, state and federal agencies and things like that. So that's probably being realistic about the demands and feasibility of doing it, in my mind, would be the first criteria. I do prefer a semi-annual grant cycle if that's feasible, because it allows, I think, for more appropriate timeline planning and horizon planning for a lot of these projects, so many of which include construction, as people are thinking about, in-water work periods and some of the other limitations that come with this. So I'm inclined to do that if it's feasible, but obviously would defer to the will of the group on that.
Agreed. The other issue that can address is this urgent grant issue that we're dealing with now. If we've got a semi-annual solicitation, it might cut down on some of those urgent grant requests.
That's a good point.
Okay.
Yeah. I like that approach for what it's worth.
Great. Thank you for that, Mark. So we will stick with this solicitation. We're going to learn a lot and how much effort it takes, and learn from our partners that have so generously volunteered to help with the process. We will stick with the 10 million, and then we will look to next year to see if we want to move to a semi-annual cycle. Thanks for everybody's engagement. And Andy, with that, would you like to move into the review process refresher?
Of course. I'm going to reshare my screen here. And yeah, I just want to echo the appreciation for the partner agencies that are helping doing the review. They have been a tremendous help. We are leaning on their expertise quite a bit, but they've all been kind of game and excited, especially again for the optics of this program and the benefits it provides. They're really engaged and happy about it. Thank you again to the partners, NIMS, ODF, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. All right, I believe you can see my screen here. All right, so we've had a lot going on over the last few months, and just to ensure that we're all on the same page moving forward with the review process, just want to kind of quickly recap here a few slides and then have some discussion or some clarifying things if we need to. That being said, all proposals are submitted are assigned to review teams based on the regions that you see here. I'm probably pretty familiar with these regions. Now, all proposals got assigned to reviewers on January 2nd. I was pretty proud of myself. I could go through the grant management system that fast and assign it, but it worked like a dream. So that was great. Each review team does have an ODFW, ODF, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and NIMS or NOAA reviewer on there. So essentially, each proposal will get 4 reviews for the most part, unless one of them had to be removed for a conflict of interest, for example. And we will try to backfill it with a new reviewer if that's the case. Each member of the review team is responsible for thoroughly reviewing all proposals submitted within their designated region. The reviews will be conducted using the 5 established review criteria outlined on the screen here. For each review criteria, team members will provide a written analysis highlighting the proposal's strengths and weaknesses based on these review criteria. Each team member will also independently assign a priority level to the proposal, selecting from the priority that you see on screen here as critical, high, medium, low, or not ready. So we are currently in level 1 review stage right now. And all the reviewers are very patient with me as we work the kinks out in the grant system on the back end here. I'm very grateful for that. In early February, each review region will hold a regional team meeting to discuss all submitted proposals. During that meeting, team members will finalize their individual reviews. Again, that's early February. Following those regional meetings, all level 1 reviews will be forwarded to ODF&W headquarters to grant staff. Each reviewed proposal will be assessed individually and a point value will be assigned based on the assigned priority level that reviewer gave. As I said before, each proposal should have 4 independent reviews. So if the priority points assigned by these 4 reviewers differ, an average score will be calculated to determine the final priority of that proposal, which again is going to be critical, high, medium, low, and not ready for funding. I will be creating a cover page for each proposal and each region, featuring the abstract and some other high-level touch points like I sent to you guys previously before this meeting. The cover pages will also have the full proposal behind them for you guys to read. They'll be organized by region, and hopefully I'll get it to the committee. My goal is early to mid-February. Again, so February 9th is the deadline for level 1 reviewers. That's that Friday. I'm going to try to turn around that Friday and get them out the door to you guys. If not, it will be the following Monday. That'll be the 2nd Monday of February that I'll get it out to you guys. So now we will be at the level 2 committee reviews. So once proposal details are finalized and distributed to each committee member, you'll be asked to cast your vote for the top 5 preferred proposals by February 26th of next month. So that's the Monday before our in-person meeting. Based on your collective recommendations, we'll compile a draft funding packet ready for review and potential adjustments during the in-person meeting, which I'll get into in a minute. I hope to deliver that final packet at least a day, if not 2 days, before our in-person meeting for considerations. Day 1 of the in-person meeting will consist of stream bio presentations. They are coming in from around the state to engage with you guys at our headquarters in Salem. Each region's stream bio representative will present overviews of all submitted projects, probably about 1 slide per proposal or less. This dedicated time will allow the committee and stream bios to engage in open dialogue, clarifying needs and priorities around each project and its region and its priorities. Following each stream bio presentation, the committee will spend the afternoon on day 1 holding internal discussions on the proposals, Q&A with the stream bios, and you'll also have the opportunity to modify your top 5 recommendations before adjourning for the evening on day 1 and going to dinner. Day 2 of the in-person meeting, depending on progress on day 1, and if we have any major turn-ups in the funding packet, the MAC will reconvene in the morning, probably about 8:30 or 9, for further discussion of specific proposals. Following any deliberations or additional discussion, the MAC will conduct a final vote using a simple majority as outlined in the operating procedures to determine what proposals are officially recommended to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. So that's kind of what we're at in a nutshell. I know it's a lot of just talking at you guys. I'll hand it back to you, Chad, for any kind of questions or discussions at this point.
Great. Thank you, Andy. Looks like, Andrew, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Andy, when will each of us be aware of the other committee's top 5 projects in the process?
So I guess that's a good question. The first is, is it a private vote or is it a public vote? I don't know if there's a preference. Presumably, though, I'll get it the Monday before the last Monday of February. And if we make it public, I can just put it in the packets when I deliver to you guys for final consideration. So if I can get to you that Wednesday, you'll see who voted for what at that point. The earliest would be that Monday, though, the 26th, because that's when I would get from you guys. And I could just turn that around immediately if you want. I didn't think that through yet.
Okay. I haven't either. Kristen?
Yeah, I didn't even think about making that a public.
Well, particularly your comment that there'll be a chance for us to reconsider our 5 based on the engagement with the regional bios. That is an important point.
Kristen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that process. Since a number of us, I know this is jumping to the next agenda item, but a number of us, I think, will be declaring potential conflicts of interest. And at least in my case, that would mean I would not vote for proposals that could have some benefit to the organization I work for. And so if we're submitting a top 5 ranking, inherent in that then is the problem that those projects are sort of artificially downgraded because of fewer people voting for them. So I just wanted to raise that as sort of a question of the structuring of that part of the voting process, which I may not have thought of in advance if this was a prior topic. But I was under the impression that there'd be a slate that comes forward and then, we could vote on them as a package. But anyway, just thinking through so that we don't
how many conflicts will
artificially downgrade projects by being thoughtful about the ethics around it.
Do we know how many committee members might have a conflict?
We haven't had any official declarations on that yet, Andrew. So without all committee members present, and I don't know people's willingness to declare any right now, but
okay,
there will be conflicts of interest.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and that will have to get declared during the opening of our in-person meeting. That's opportunity to declare the conflict of interest is that day 1 of that meeting, which I think we'll get into some discussion today with the Ethics Commission.
I think it's also really important to address Kristen's concern about artificially deflating the value of some of these projects because one committee member or another has recused themselves because of an ethical concern.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mark, I think you had your hand up before I respond to your one.
Different question, so go ahead and follow your thought.
Yeah, Kristen, originally we did make a recommendation of bringing packets forward last summer when we went over this process, but that got withdrawn. And since we don't have a scoring criteria right now, hopefully we can introduce that next year. Yeah, we just don't have a packet. So that's a very good point. I didn't think about that. If you're excusing yourself, you're official.
Yeah.
I don't know how we would kind of make it around that.
Could I also ask everyone online to make sure that you're muted? We're getting some chatter. Thank you. Kristen, it looked like you had your hand up, and then Mark, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, since it's on the same subject, one possibility is to do a weighted ranking. So, you know, it would be sort of a data processing nightmare, but I think you could, you know, do a weighted ranking for each of the projects. And then if, you know, only a certain number of people had submitted a vote, it would be weighted accordingly. My guess is it would test my balance of statistical management in Excel, but I'm pretty sure there's a way you can set that up to automate that process.
So
yeah,
I'm
I think that's right.
And I'll probably follow up with you offline here, but just to get an idea of that. So each committee member would actually rank each proposal instead of their top 5. Each proposal would get a ranking of 1 through 5. Is that what you're getting at? Or am I misconstruing what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess that was not what I'm saying, but I think that's the only way that could work. So maybe there could be a subcommittee of some sort that could work on this and get back with a recommendation. I think it might be difficult to solve the issue, I agree, you know, offhand, but I think you could designate a small group to work on that and follow up electronically
Kristen,
with a recommendation.
Let's add this to the agenda of the kind of chair meeting that we check in with Andy and Sarah. It looks like Sarah has dropped in the chat that OCRF may do that, and maybe we could reach out to them to see their methodology for doing that. Mark, I see your hand is up, and then afterwards, it looked like there was a question that came in from Laura with the EQ that we might be able to answer as well. So go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so Andy, correct, it looked like there were like 70 projects, is that right?
74, yes.
So, you know, OCRF has about that many each time, 60 or so. And then the way it worked there was the 60 were divvied up randomly among the advisory committee members so that each proposal was reviewed by 2 advisory committee members. So each advisory committee member was only reviewing maybe a total of 20 projects. And then if somebody had a conflict, we just made sure that that advisory committee wasn't reviewing that particular project. Because as I'm sort of digesting, I think Kristen raised a really good point, and that's how OCRF deals with it. I'm also realizing all of a sudden you're assigning each of us 73 projects to review. And the way OCRF got around that was, again, you know, basically divvying it up so each committee member had, each project got reviewed by at least 2 committee members, and then we did the ranking. You know, they all got ranked, and it was sort of a rank score as how they got merged across all the committee members. So that might be interesting to think about and talk about, because that 73 projects is a lot of projects to sort of digest and evaluate.
Indeed.
So I'm glad to talk more about it if you guys want to offline, or you could bring in, obviously, Sarah or Reva from OCRF too.
Yeah, Mark, that's a great recommendation. Thank you for that.
The other question I had is I can't remember how much we talked about as we the advisory committee rank projects. Were we going to use the same criteria that the review teams used, or what guidance would you give us or expect us to take on as we look at projects?
Yes, there was. So a recommendation was to do ranking and using a scoring criteria in summer, and it was taken out of option. So it was more arbitrary of what you guys were you were just gonna choose what you liked for funding. And the idea of voting for your top 5, and then we would create a funding packet off that. Originally, we were also thinking about the priority ranking from the regional teams. We could create a funding packet off of that also, funding priority from that to help inform your decision. But initially, you were just going to submit your top 5. You weren't doing, per se, a comprehensive review, though. You weren't going to say your strengths and weaknesses in each of these 5 areas for each proposal. It was kind of a meta review, or you were going to do as a committee member.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Andrew, you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Sarah.
Yeah, related to Mark's observation of 74 projects. To what extent, and also related to the presentation that we'll receive from the regional biologists, would there be a way to organize the level of presentation and or review based on the scores that those regional teams provide? In other words, if there's unanimity that this project's not ready, does that slide to a different level of review or not? And that's a question more than a comment.
That's a great question. That's what I was considering working with the stream bios on. For those, that are ranked as 0 and not ready for funding, then yeah, most likely they're either it's going to be put on a slide at the end of their presentation, and they would talk and justify that at that point to you guys.
Okay. I think it will be very informative to hear about each project just for our future deliberations as well, but they shouldn't spend as much time presenting a project that is clearly not ready or is poorly scored.
That's my understanding too.
Okay.
That's the guidance I was going to give, so I'm happy to hear that.
Great.
And then we also owe it to those applicants to be able to clearly describe why they were not ready, or why they did not qualify, why they had a lower score, so that they're able to improve for next time.
Yep, we got those practices in place too to ensure that we have a proper feedback for them. Yeah.
Great. Sure. Okay, and Sarah, you had your hand up.
Yeah, hi everybody. Sarah Rife, Habitat Division Administrator with ODFW. I just 74 proposals, each of you having to review all of those. I was just going to kind of echo and maybe connect the dots on a couple of things that others have said. I think I wouldn't view it as in-depth review of 74 proposals. You'll have a cover letter that Andy will provide that will summarize what is in there. You'll have the rankings from the review teams. So like Andrew was suggesting, you'll have some sense for what's ready and a good project. And then you'll have presentations from them as well, all before you need to make your decision. So I wouldn't go too deeply on all 74 if I were you. And then I was just also going to say to the question, the good question, I forget who asked it, about are there any criteria that the advisory committee are using for assigning their points? Andy, I wonder though if they're thinking back to the fact that we're seeking to have these projects serve as mitigation in the habitat conservation plan, if we can provide some at least review criteria to serve as a North Star with that goal in mind.
That's a good idea. Thanks, Sarah. I'll note that down. Yeah, and I would just echo those comments. Yeah, it's just kind of a meta review for you guys. We're going to give you as much as we can for that oversight. But I'm not opposed to creating a little working group again and reevaluating this in the next month. We do have time right now.
I think it would certainly be helpful to have, at the minimum, what Sarah described of a guiding document that describes what the services are going to be looking for in order to meet mitigation criteria. That's really the purpose here. And I think that it would be helpful to have a written document that describes what that is, so that we're able to see how well projects align with what that may be.
Yeah, I'll look into that and talk to some of our partners on that and see what we can get.
Very good. And then I do want to just address the comment that came through in the chat from Laura with DEQ regarding whether or not projects will be split or lumped based on project type. And it's my understanding that there will not be any differentiation or ranking in different categories between planning, implementation, engagement, or mixed project types. Those will all be aggregated.
That's kind of the guidance I've been giving this last solicitation. I would imagine as we develop as a grant program, that we probably create some funding priorities and we start to understand where funding's moving throughout the state, and we might create those bins some way or some form. But that's the guidance I've been giving, Chad.
Great. There any other discussion or questions that would like to be asked prior to moving to the presentation that we have scheduled? All right, seeing none, hearing none. Andy, if you would check in to see if our presenters are online and ready.
Yes, we got Lex Tingy and Stephanie Hefner presenting today. I see Lex, and thanks for joining a little bit early. It looks like actually we're right on time for where we had you. Is Stephanie joining you today, Lex? Oh, you're muted.
It looks like Stephanie has joined on video as well. Lex, it looks like you have unmuted and remuted yourself. Yeah, 1 second. Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself while we're waiting on
Yeah,
Lex?
I can do that. Can you hear me okay? Sometimes my desktop doesn't like to connect correctly. So I am Stephanie Hefner. I am the training and curriculum coordinator for Oregon Government Ethics Commission. And with me today, I have Lex Tingy, who is one of our great trainers. And we're going to be presenting today on part of Oregon government ethics laws. We're going to be focusing on conflicts of interest, what they are, prohibited use of office, subsequent employment. Lex, are you able to unmute yourself yet, or do you need me to run into the room? Okay, I'm gonna take myself off camera for just a second. I'm gonna go across the hall and help Lex with tech support. So just a moment.
Wonderful, thank you, Stephanie.
Chad, in the meantime, then for this voting thing, should we reevaluate, and then I'll just talk with you and Kristen next week at our chair meeting, and we can kind of talk about next steps at that point.
I think so. And after the meeting, we'll be sure to communicate with the greater committee so that everybody's on the same page and no one's kept in the dark.
Thank you for the ideas, everyone. We do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Before, all proposals to read. It'll be hard though, narrowing down 43 million to 10 million. Ugh. As they were coming in, I just wanted to hit like accept all so badly. Just like everyone just spend so much time doing this stuff. You've all been there.
Just to observe, it reinforces the importance of all the work we did to set up this process and the criteria and everything too, because a lot of people aren't going to get funded.
Yeah.
Which, unfortunate as it is, that's certainly better than having extra money to spend on conservation and having it going unspent because of a lack of applicants. So
a much better problem.
This is a good problem to have.
Yeah.
It is great excitement. We just have to keep their engagement. Like I said, we got some good process improvement ideas, and hopefully next year's even bigger.
Lex, you are unmuted, but we still cannot hear you. You might have to check the audio settings to ensure that your microphone selection is the right one.
I have about 3 microphones hooked up to my computer, and I have 2 different speakers. So I have been there. I've had voices thrown across the room to my Google speaker.
So apparently for some reason, her laptop speaker isn't working. So bear with us just a moment. We're going to get everything set up on my laptop, and we'll be with you in just a moment. I do apologize for the delay.
Problem. Yeah, thank you for your willingness to participate. And I also recognize that we are quite a bit early, so.
You come up with some fun jokes to share in this downtime we have.
I don't think we need to subject anybody to that, Andy, but thank you.
Oh. Oh.
Sounds like something is starting.
Yeah, and they did encourage, I'm sure Stephanie Lex will mention it again. Part of this is just an engagement and discussion with the committee. And as you have questions, like they definitely encourage to write them down and ask them. This is a learning opportunity for all of us right now.
Yeah. You know, Andy, another thing that I was looking for, and it looks like it's not a metric that we were tracking in the solicitation raw data here, is supporting organizations or collaboration.
We do. I just didn't want to give too much
Okay,
info.
I think
I
we are
apologize.
just about there. Thank you
Very
all
good.
so much for your patience. We readjust. As was mentioned, yes, we do want this to be useful for you all. So if you, actually, I should do this the other way. If you all have questions, please, we're here for it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to moderate the comments like I was hoping to be able to, but hope we will, between Lex and myself, we should be able to have a good sense of what's going on here. So just a second. Okay.
All
So
right,
are you all able to see the main screen and not our notes, just to make sure things were going kind of wonky on us?
That's correct, Stephanie. We see your presentation screen, but not the notes.
Oh, I can't hear you. Wait, hold on just 1 second. Can you hear me okay, folks?
We can.
Okay.
Can you hear us now, Stephanie?
I can't hear you. That is the issue. Just a second.
Now can you hear us? It looks like you need to hit that mute button.
That's not working. We're going to try one more thing. Give us just a second. I do.
And depending on how this goes, we might just have to write in the chat that we can hear Stephanie and ask her to proceed without the ability to hear us.
I agree. Will do. Yeah, and I can moderate the questions back and forth pretty easily, so that's totally fine.
Yeah, wonderful.
And then any chats. I'm happy to get you guys all in person next month. I think the last time we met together was a year ago, almost to the day, actually in February, right? Like February 5th. And that I think we last talked in person. So it's going to be nice. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I know it's travel for some of you. It'll be nice to kind of catch up.
Andy, the other option would be for one of them to call in on their phone. They can run their audio through the phone.
Good idea. Put that in there.
Stephanie, if you can hear us, please proceed.
Okay. Can we hear folks now?
Can you hear us?
Yay, we can.
All right, wonderful.
It's always nice when it all works. Are you able to see the slide deck with no notes?
Yes, we're able to see your presentation and not the notes.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to Lex then.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you guys again so much. Of course, we never have issues in practice rounds, but you go live and that's when everything happens. Like I said, I'm Lex. This is Stephanie is with me today. I'm going to refer to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission as OGEC from here on out. It's a little bit less of a mouthful, but our job is to help public officials navigate the nuances of Oregon government ethics law through trainings and staff advice. So today we'll be looking at a general overview of 244 and then some definitions before we zero in on conflicts of interest and prohibited use of office. So why we're here today is because the Legislative Assembly declared that our service as public officials is a public trust. And one safeguard for that trust is to require all public officials to comply with the provisions of ORS Chapter 244. So that means that each of us have to make a personal judgment in deciding matters like if we're using our official position for a prohibited financial gain, what gifts we can and cannot accept, and when and if we need to disclose a conflict of interest. So it's something you're going to hear a lot today, but it's super important to understand that as public officials, compliance is on our shoulders. So it's our responsibility to familiarize ourselves with the provisions of Oregon government ethics law. Now, that being said, we're going to give an overview of the ethics law as well as provide our kind of interpretation of those requirements. It should not be used as a substitute for a review of the statutes and the rules themselves. We always recommend all public officials to read ORS 244, make sure they understand it. And then, of course, it is not legal advice. So there are always other laws or regulations not within our jurisdiction and just all kinds of details within specific situations. So if you do ever have a certain situation, definitely reach out to us so we can make sure that everything's being applied there. And then, of course, if you do ever have any questions, especially if that specific situation comes about, you can reach out to us. We're available Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We do advice over phone, email, in person. Really, we're just available however you need us. And so a little bit of background about OGEC. The Oregon Government Ethics Law was actually enacted by voters in 1974. So if you know history, that was during the Watergate era. So we're trying to reestablish public trust in government by adding that transparency. And so again, not the last reminder, but the personal, it's our responsibility as public officials. So if a violation or a sanction happened, that's on our shoulders, not our governing bodies. And then obviously after making this law, they had to make a commission. So we were formed to regulate the government ethics law. It's made up of 9 volunteer members. And then our commission staff is relatively small. We just reached 15, but we're here to help enforce government ethics law and help public officials. So jurisdiction, OGEC does obviously have jurisdiction over ORS Chapter 244, and those are those ethical things. So prohibited use of office, conflict of interest, nepotism, gifts, things like that. We do actually have jurisdiction over lobby regulation law, ORS 171. That's just the laws which require lobbyists and the entities they represent to register and periodically report their expenditures. And then lastly, our third area of jurisdiction is public meetings law, excuse me. And this was previously just the executive session provisions, but it has been expanded for all of public meetings law as of this year. So that's exciting. So one thing though, I do want to recognize that many of us kind of have certain expectations or beliefs about what ethical behavior is, which may or may not match what falls under the Oregon government ethics law. So the specific areas that do fall under ORS 244 and within our jurisdiction are conflicts of interest. So what constitutes one, how to handle it. Prohibited use of office, focusing on financial benefits that are prohibited and what is allowed. And then the rules against nepotism, the employment of relatives and household members. Gifts, what is considered a gift, whether you can accept it or not, and other provisions. And then finally, the statement of economic interest, also known as SEI. Certain public officials have to file this, and so there's laws on how that's filed and how we can help them. And again, we're going to cover those, but again, situations have their own little circumstances and things. So if you do ever have a question or anything, give us a call. We can only give advice on things that have not already happened. So we do ask you to reach us out before that potential violation may have occurred, not afterwards, but we are here to help. And so today we'll be focusing on conflicts of interest and prohibited use of office. So by the end of the session, you should be able to define a conflict of interest and know how to handle it, as well as know what prohibited use of office is and what isn't allowed within that. So we'll start with some super fun definitions now. To know the law, we have to know what it's talking about when it refers to like a public official or a relative, things like that. So public official is first. We are obviously all public officials, and a public official is you if you serve the state of Oregon, whether it's a city, county, special district, or any other public body. And one thing to note is that the status is regardless of whether you are compensated for your service or not. So there's actually estimated about 260,000 public officials in the state of Oregon alone, many of whom are volunteer positions. So this would include public employees, elected officials, members of boards, committees, commissions, and volunteers. So again, why that's important is that we as a public official, if we are serving a public body, we are a public official, and that responsibility for complying with the Oregon government ethics law is on our shoulders. Now, some of these laws will also apply to relatives. And at first you might be thinking, oh, that's easy. But actually the law has a very narrow, not narrow a definition, but a distinct definition of relative. So the statute defines relatives to include your spouse, your children and stepchildren, your daughters and son-in-laws, your parents and step-parents, siblings and step-siblings, and your spouse's family. So their children, parents, and siblings. So you might be wondering, what about grandparents, grandkids, nieces, nephews, cousins, etc., all those? They are considered relatives in that general term, but they are not considered such under ethics law, so it does not actually apply to them. There is one caveat, because there's always caveats, especially with government. But the law further defines a relative as anyone who meets these three criteria. And that is anyone who you have a support obligation to as a public official, anyone receiving benefits of your employment, or anyone from whom you receive a benefit of employment. So for that support obligation, that would be, say you had gotten divorced, but you still pay alimony for that ex-spouse, even though they wouldn't typically be considered a relative because they're divorced, because you still are paying alimony, they are considered a relative. And then the benefits of employment, typically we see health insurance, sometimes grandchildren and things are in health insurance, so they would count as a relative in that situation. Now, some statutes also apply to household members, which is a pretty easy definition, as a member of our household is any person who lives in our home. So that could extend to grandparents, foster children, significant others, exchange students, friends. Really, if they are residing in your home, they are a member of your household. And the law further goes on to also apply to businesses with which you, your relatives, or household members are associated with. So to figure out whether a business is one we're associated with, we first need to define what is and is not a business. So the law defines a business as any legal entity operated for economic gain. So corporations, partnerships, firms, enterprises, organizations, self-employment, really anything created and operated for economic gain is going to count as a business. Now, a public body, there are two things that would not be considered a business, and one is a public body. So city, county, special district, the commission, for example, we are a public body, so we are not considered a business. And the second is a nonprofit corporation, that is tax exempt, so 501c, as long as you, your relative, or household member is associated in a non-paid capacity. So as soon as you are paid for them, like you are working for them, that does become a business you're associated with. One easy example of that is, let's say 3 board members are all associated to the YMCA. So the first one serves on the YMCA board. That one, because they're serving in a non-paid capacity, that's not a business with which they're associated with. The second is a YMCA member. They're paying for the membership. The YMCA is not paying them. So again, not a business that they're associated with. But the third, their son is actually an employee of the YMCA. Because the YMCA is then paying the son, that would be a business with which their relative, their son, is associated with. So good to know those little minute changes that can change the definition of that. Now, whether or not it's a business you're associated with, we have to look at, depending on whether it's a private or publicly held. And publicly held corporation is just defined as where stock is publicly sold and owned. So for a private business to be a business with which you're associated, you, your relatives, or household members must be a director, officer, owner, employee, or agent, or own stock, equity interest, stock options, or debt instruments of $1,000 or more at any point in the preceding calendar year. Now, publicly held corporations is a little different. So for it to be a business with which you are associated, you, your relative, or household member must be an officer or director, or hold any of those stock options, equity interest, debt instruments, etc., of $100,000 or more at any point in the preceding calendar year. The only other thing to note on this, if you are a public official that has to fill out an SEI, any business what you put there that you're associated with on your income level, that would also be associated business, even if it didn't match these criteria. But that's only for if you have to fill out an SEI. So those are the questions when looking at whether you're associated to a business or not. First, making sure it's a business, and then seeing if it fits any of these criteria. So we're going to go ahead really quickly, just to make sure we got all the definitions down. I'm going to ask true or false. Your grandchild is included in the law's definition of a relative. You can go ahead, if you're on camera, give a thumbs up for true, thumbs down for false, or enter in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds to decide. Perfect. Okay. All right, I saw a lot of thumbs down. Correct. False. The grandchild is not included in the law's definition of a relative, unless, again, you have a support obligation or receiving a benefit of employment, vice versa. Perfect. Okay, so the nonprofit you volunteer at is a business with which you are associated. Again, thumbs up for true, thumbs down for false. Yeah, okay, everyone's answering. Perfect. Yes, false. Because it is a non-paid position, that's not considered a business with which you are associated. All right, so we got through all of the definitions. So now we have a better understanding and can really look at conflicts of interest. Now we'll start looking at the situation. Let's say in addition to serving on the Mitigation Advisory Committee, you also serve on the board of a nonprofit corporation. We'll say the committee is voting on grant amendments for this nonprofit. Do you have a conflict of interest? So to know that, there are a couple different things we need to look at, but first of all, how does the law define a conflict of interest? So the law defines two types of conflicts of interest: an actual conflict of interest and a potential conflict of interest. We'll start with actual, as it's typically a little bit easier to point out and identify. But an actual conflict of interest is any action, decision, or recommendation made by you while in the capacity as public official, which would be to the private financial benefit or detriment of yourself as the public official, your relatives, or any business that you or a relative is associated with. So really long definition, but this basically means that the action you're taking as a public official would with certainty create a financial effect. And there's two other things. First, it says financial benefit or financial detriment. That means that a conflict of interest could even apply, even if it's creating a negative financial effect. A lot of people only connect it with a positive, right? Financial gain. And then secondly, this one, conflicts of interest applies to you, your relatives, and then businesses with which your relatives are associated with. So conflicts of interest does not apply to household members. So an example, let's say you also, on top of being a committee member, you work for a private business and your employer asks you to help draft a grant proposal that will come before the committee. When the grant proposal comes before the committee, would you have an actual conflict of interest? Yes, because the private business is one with which you are associated, and you voting on that would be an official action in your role as public official that would create a certain financial effect. So potential is very similar. It's any action, decision, or recommendation made by you while working in the capacity as an official, which could be to the private financial benefit or detriment of yourself as the public official, your relatives, or any business that you or a relative is associated with. So this means that could wording means that the financial effect of the action is possible, but not certain. And again, could be a financial benefit or a financial detriment, and it's only going to apply to ourselves, our relatives, and any businesses associated with us or our relatives. So a really great example would say that the advisory committee is discussing grant criteria for a grant program that is set to start accepting applications in a few months. You as a committee member actually work as a private business that could apply for this grant. At this point, the grant application process is not open. There haven't been applications, and you don't know if your employer would actually apply for that or not. However, there is a potential that they could and could create that financial effect. So it would be a potential conflict of interest at that point. So if you notice, when we kind of break down those examples, there's 3 things that need to be met for it to be considered a conflict of interest. The first is that the public official must be taking an official action. So that could be a vote, decision, or recommendation. The second is that that official action would or could result in a private financial benefit or detriment. And the third is that the result of that action and that financial impact must affect the public official, a relative, or a business in which the public official or relative is associated. So whether potential or actual, you're always going to have those 3 criteria that need to be met for it to be a conflict of interest. So if we go back to that example of, in addition to serving on the committee, you're also serving on the board of a nonprofit corporation, you'll now be voting on grant amendments for this nonprofit. So 1, is there official action? Yes, we'd be voting on a grant amendment. That is an official action. 2, is it going to have a financial impact? Yes, whether we vote yes or no, that's going to have some sort of financial impact on the nonprofit corporation. Third, is that nonprofit corporation a business with which we're associated with? So looking at this, we're serving on the board, which means it's an unpaid capacity. So therefore, it's not a position or a business, with which we're associated with, and there is no conflict of interest. Now, if we change that and we were working for the nonprofit, we were being paid, we were on staff, that would become a conflict of interest, because therefore then that nonprofit is the business with which we're associated with. So if you have any questions, if you want to go ahead and ask now, that's fine. We're going to go ahead into how to handle a conflict of interest, but I wanted to make sure everyone was clear on that definition. Oh, yeah, we have a hand raised from Kristen.
So one thing that in some of the prior conversations we've had with the committee, and I think this may have come through information that your agency provided, is there a difference in the recommendations this committee makes because those are recommendations and we don't have the authority to actually make the action? So we're making a recommendation to the Fish and Wildlife Commission, who ultimately is the body that has decision-making authority. And I was under the impression from past conversations that there was a difference there because of that. But in what you just presented, it sounds like just the fact that we're making a recommendation as a public official means that regardless of whether we have decision-making authority or not, it would be tied up in the same definitions of actual and potential conflict. So just since I've received conflicting information about that, I wanted to make sure to pin down the specifics.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you're recommending funding and you aren't granting funding yourself, those definitions of conflicts of interest will still apply. It's just in those situations, it would typically be a potential conflict of interest because you are not making that absolute decision. However, you are still making a decision that could financially impact. Is that correct, Sophie? Making sure.
Yeah. So the key I'll speak up. So the key for, especially for advisory groups, is that they're making recommendations to a governing body. So making recommendations to a governing body is taking an official action. So all of the conflicts of interest provisions would apply as long as you're making those recommendations to a governing body. Now, if you were making those recommendations to an individual, then that is a whole nother can of worms.
Perfect.
Understood. So that seems like the key difference, and it's a potential conflict of interest, not an actual, but I mean, just the same. Our best scenario is to declare that and avoid taking an inappropriate action.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, now we know that how to define something as a potential.
I think there's another hand up.
Yeah,
sorry,
I have a question too. I was wondering if you could do an example that wasn't a nonprofit. So like I work in private industry and I find it a little bit confusing where, if I have clients that have provided a grant application, does that, I don't have anything to do with their application, anything to do with any part of that project or process, but where does that put me?
So sounds like kind of with a consulting firm, is that correct? If you have clients? Or...
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So if the consulting firm itself was submitting a proposal, then you would have a conflict of interest.
Sure.
However, if it's your clients, because it's the clients, we consider them separate from the consulting firm, there would not be a conflict of interest there.
Because it doesn't meet the definition of it.
Yeah, because it doesn't meet the definition of a business with which you're associated with when it's the client. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Distinction being that they pay you versus you pay them.
Correct. Yes, that is. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
And I guess that they're paying you for your services, not as an employee, right? Because if you're a consultant and they pay you for your services, and then you are voting on a recommendation that benefits them financially, you're saying because you aren't a direct employee, that doesn't count as an associated business? Is that right?
Yes, because so associated business is one has to fall under the business, those private or publicly held, right? And then 2, to be associated with it, you have to be one of those, like the officer, director, agent, that kind of thing, or hold that stock in it. So in that situation, you are associated with the private consulting firm, but just because that business is a client of them, that's still not a business with which you're associated with. And you could take it even further in saying that, because typically we're looking at some kind of financial gain or detriment, right? That client has already paid the consulting company, no matter what, to get consulting on this. So that's it's not necessarily that your recommendation would have an impact on the direct funds to the consulting company. It is on the client. Does that make sense? Did I confuse you even more? I might have went a little.
I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It feels a little awkward, but I.
There are some. It's kind of like with that relative definition too. How some people we consider key relatives are left out because that's how the law is stated. We do just kind of look at exactly what's within it.
Right.
Yeah, I won't say they're my grandchildren, but got it. Okay.
So
yeah,
just
really
this is Sarah. Just to dig into that just a little bit further, Fran, are you saying like you are part of your ability to serve on this advisory committee is with funding provided by your clients, or that you might be working on a project that is grant funded?
Right. So I'm here 100% voluntarily. Like no one covers my time. I'm just doing it. So that's not paid by my clients, but I think I will have clients that will submit applications. I haven't had anything that's not part of what I do. It's completely separate from what I do. So it feels to me that it's not a conflict of interest, but I will see, I will see clients of mine on, submitting applications, and that just feels a little awkward.
Right.
For example, if Nuveen were to put forward an application, I am a direct employee, so I would not be able to vote on that. But Fran is a consultant that works with us, but because she's a consultant and not a direct employee, she would be able to without the same conflict of interest. Right? There's a specific example of a client of Fran's, and because I work for that company as a direct employee, I'd have a conflict. Fran would not because she's a contractor, correct?
Correct. And Fran, you were also just saying that the consulting firm you work with is also a volunteer position. Is that what you're saying? Did I miss that?
So the company we're talking about is mine. I own it. So it's not okay. I don't volunteer for myself, but my position in this advisory committee is voluntary. Like it's not, I'm not being paid to do this work.
Yes, that makes sense. Sorry, I misunderstood that. But yes, Chad, where you were saying that is correct, where you, because you are a direct employee, would have that conflict of interest, but where she is a contractor, she would not.
Okay.
And just for everybody to be comfortable here, we did not put forth an application. So that this doesn't exist now. It was just used as an example.
Yes, no, that's totally fine. And what we'll do, I'll also talk a little bit about what we do when we have a conflict of interest. And there is an option where even though you may not have a conflict of interest, you can still say, because of the appearance of one, I choose to not vote on this. That's not required in any way, but we do have some officials that choose to do that when they do feel like, Fran, you were saying it felt a little awkward with that. That is something you could do.
So say a consultant were to help a client develop a grant application and submit it. They wouldn't have an actual conflict of interest because they're not a direct employee. But if they were voting to approve the very grant application that they wrote for the client, that could be perceived as one, and you may choose to recuse yourself anyway.
Correct. Yes. Perfect. Okay.
That could get into prohibited use of office.
Yeah, and you could that is the one thing why we do conflicts of interest and prohibited use of office together, because typically when you have one problem, you do tend to have the other violation as well. So that could fall under prohibited use of office, which we'll talk about after the conflict of interest. But
excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so yes, well, now we have the conflict of interest. Declaring it will differ on what type of a public official you are. We obviously today are going to focus on the process for board and commission members and elected officials. So whether it's a potential or actual conflict of interest, the first thing you need to do is make a public announcement of the nature of the conflict of interest on each occasion it arises. And the keyword there being a public announcement. So even if, for example, if you were doing a meeting and you had an executive session, you would still need to make that conflict of interest statement in public session. Now, once you make that announcement, if it is a potential one, you are allowed to still continue with debate, voting, everything. Nothing stopping you from acting on that. But if it's an actual conflict of interest, then once after you make that announcement, you have to refrain from participating and may not vote. So no debate, discussion, no voting. And really the key thing here is making sure that you are making that announcement every single time it arises. So even if you have something that may be on the agenda for 3 meetings in a row, you need to do that every single time, mainly because, again, going back to this is a public trust thing, right? And you may have some members of the public that attend that first meeting, but don't attend the third or attend the second and not the first. So that's why it's important to make that public announcement every time. And also the nature of the conflict of interest just means that you can't just say, I have a conflict of interest, so I'm abstaining from voting. No, you have to say, I have an actual conflict of interest because of, and just give a little bit of that details of that nature. So again, public trust, having that transparency. Now, there is an exception. So if there is if your vote is necessary to meet a requirement, such as a minimum number of votes, there is an exception to that voting. So you still would not be able to participate in any discussion or debate on the matter, and a public announcement declaration would still be need to made. But after you make that announcement and don't discuss, you would be able to vote just to meet quorum. Now, the one thing is that it only applies when enough members of the public or of the public body are present or met with a conflict, not just because someone is absent. So not when a quorum is unmet because someone is absent. Sorry, I fumbled that definition a little bit. But so for an example would be, I know there's 7 voting members. So let's say you have to meet a minimum of 4 votes, right? Unfortunately, though, you're voting on something that actually 5 of you all have somehow are associated with the business that submitted this proposal. So typically the 5 of you, because you have that, it is a business with which you're associated, you are voting on the funding. It's an actual conflict of interest. You wouldn't be able to vote, but you do need that. You do need 2. In that case, it would be 2 because you need 4. But 2 of you would be able to vote to make sure you meet that quorum. How that's decided, we typically recommend the body to have some sort of policy, whether that's alphabetically, seniority, things like that. It doesn't happen a lot, but it is something to be aware of when you do have those minimum number of vote requirements. Perfect. So if we had a situation where, in addition to serving on the advisory committee, you're working for a nonprofit corporation, and the committee is voting on grant amendments for this nonprofit, what would you as a board member need to do? First, we definitely need to declare the conflict, and it's an actual conflict because we are working for them. It's a business with which we're associated, and we are voting on something that will have a definite financial impact on them. And then after making that, announcement, are we able to discuss or debate or vote on it? Give me a thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. Yes, because it is an actual conflict of interest, we would not be able to discuss or vote on that. So if we change over, let's say instead that you are working for a consulting firm, kind of similar to what we were just talking about. The committee is voting to approve a plan for the grant process that includes soliciting outside assistance to assist in executing the plan, executing the plan. Sorry. So, and that the consulting firm you work for is typically the one people like the committee and others will reach out to with issues about this. So does the member need to declare a potential conflict of interest and abstain from voting? So we have declared it is a potential conflict of interest. It's not for sure going to, we're not for sure going to reach out to our consulting firm, but it is a possibility. But are we allowed to vote with it being a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. Yes, perfect. So, and here is where I just like to bring up that you can always choose to abstain from voting even if there isn't an actual potential or actual conflict of interest because of the appearance of one. Again, it's a choice. You don't have to. When you are declaring it for the record, you'll just want to state that you're abstaining because of an appearance of a conflict. And speaking of record, so anything, these public announcements will be recorded by the public body you serve. So for board and commission members, this typically looks like the minutes and recording of a public announcement. And this is just super important because if anyone, we want to have that transparency with the public. But two, if anyone were ever to open a complaint with us, we do have to look into that. And so having that minutes and the recordings, having that public announcement recorded means that we can say, oh yeah, they did follow the law here. There was not a violation, that kind of thing. So, okay, so now is where we typically head into use of office. Did anyone have any other questions after kind of going over that declaration process?
I've just got one question, Lex, and
Mm-hmm.
that is because this is a little bit nuanced. Some are very clear and some are less so.
Yeah.
Is it best, if we know that there's something that's going to be voted on, we think we may have a potential or actual conflict, would we just reach out directly to the OGEC to inform that? Or, okay.
Yeah, so you don't have to inform us necessarily, but if you want to know for sure, like, do I have this potential? Like, I'm thinking this is something that might be going on. You can email us, call us, even come into person. We're in Salem. But yeah, we do provide advice. Again, it has to be something that hasn't happened yet. That's the only caveat there. But we definitely recommend that because again, like you said, some of it seems really cut and dry, but other things can, depending on the circumstances, get a little bit muddy.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we'll now go into privity use of office, just because, like I said, those typically tend to happen together. So as a public official, you may not use or attempt to use your official position or office to obtain financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment for yourself, a relative or member of your household, or any business with which you are associated, or a relative or member of your household is associated, if the financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment would not otherwise be available but for your holding of the official position or office. So that's really, that but for is really important. Basically saying that you're not allowed to use or attempt to use your office to get a financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment that you could only get because of the position you're currently in. And so another thing to look at the statute is that it also includes household members. So unlike conflicts of interest, this is also going to apply to anyone living in your house and any business with which they are associated with. And then finally, that it uses that language of you may not use or attempt. So even the attempt, whether an economic gain or avoidance of financial detriment happens, is still considered a violation. So for example, let's say that a university reached out to you asking you to teach a summer course because of your position with the committee on the grant writing proposals, or writing grant proposals, excuse me. That would be a privity use of office since they only offered because of your position with the committee. And now likewise, if you were the one reaching out to a college offering to teach a course because of your position with the committee, that would be a privity use of office. Even if they said no, you would still have that attempt, and that is still a violation. You could always do those for free, obviously, but that is a lot of time. So something to consider with those. And so really the most important question when trying to figure out if something might be a privity use of office is, do I only have this opportunity because of the position I hold? If the answer is yes, then the action is probably prohibited. But the flip side to that is if the opportunity is available to the general public, then the benefit may be allowed. So another example that you would only have this opportunity because of the position you hold, if you do have a private consulting business and are a committee member, you obviously have access to some of the grant recipients and things, learning some of the contacts and things there. If you're only making those contacts because of the committee, so whether that's they came before you or you went to an event as a committee member and met them, you wouldn't be able to use those contacts in your private consulting business because if you did, that would be a prohibited use of office since you only had access to them because of the position you held. So something to think about that. Now, of course, there are exceptions of what is allowed. Obviously, you are allowed some financial compensation and things like that as a public official. So the first, of course, is that official compensation package. So that's any financial benefit that is identified by the public body they serve as part of their official compensation package. It can, as long as it's formally adopted policy by the public body or like an employment agreement or union contract that would permit that. Typically salary, health insurance. Even we've had sometimes where volunteers where, yes, they don't get a compensation package, but they have a formally adopted policy where they do get maybe discounts or like tickets to events depending on their agency and where they're working. So that's an example of that. And then the next thing would be reimbursement of expenses. So payments from our public body is reimbursement for expenses we have personally paid while conducting official business. Obviously, the reimbursements must comply with applicable laws and policies. But things like parking fees, event registration, meals, mileage, training. So anything that the public body requires of you. So let's say they send the committee to an event to meet with other committees. If you did have to pay for like parking or event registration, you would be able to be reimbursed for that. One thing to be careful of with that though, is a lot of us have like credit cards with rewards points and things like that. And if your public body doesn't have a policy allowing you to use like those reward points and stuff, that would technically be a prohibited use of office as you're only having the availability to earn those points only because you were a member and had to pay for that. So just something to be aware of if you are ever getting reimbursed for the expenses. Now, third would be honorarium. So honorarium is a payment or something of economic value given to a public official in exchange for providing a service. So this could be something like speeches or a presentation or even serving like on a panel. To qualify as honorarium though, it can't be set in advance, right? This is like you giving a speech and they come up afterwards, give you a thank you card and it has a gift card or something in it. You're allowed to accept it as long as it's with a value of $50 or less for that event. Something to note here is that some public bodies and agencies have stricter policies. For example, OGEC, we don't accept honorarium at all. So you would always revert back to that stricter policy. But if you don't have a policy, then you would be allowed to if you ever did give a speech as a committee member or something and someone offered that thank you. Kind of along the same lines, you can accept an award as long as you have not solicited the award and the award is offered to recognize a professional achievement. So this isn't award of appreciation, that honorarium or gifts. This is specifically for professional achievement. Think of things like the Nobel Prize. That one's pretty big, but also like Oregon's Teacher of the Year award, things like that. Even though they typically come with like money and things like that, you would be able to accept that as long as you have not solicited it yourself, so you have not submitted yourself for it. And then we get into gifts, which gifts, I will say, is a very big, it has 16 exceptions by itself. So we do have a webinar solely based on gifts if you ever wanted to know more about that. But a public official is allowed to accept a gift so long as the gift is permitted under the gift clause. And that the gift clause basically says that we can accept gifts of not more than $50 in any given calendar year from a source that has a legislative or administrative interest in what we do as public officials. So to think about that as someone that has an economic interest in our actions as a public official. For an example, let's say there was a grant recipient or someone who is putting in a proposal. They wanted to take you out to dinner, right? They obviously do have that legislative or administrative interest because your vote will mean something to them. So you could still go to dinner as long as it was under the $50 limit and as long as that's the only gift you received from them in that calendar year. Now, however, if it's someone who doesn't have a legislative or administrative interest, you are allowed to accept that gift. And then, of course, like I said, there's 16 gift exceptions for things like travel, your relatives, things like that. But I do suggest definitely attending our webinar, or again, if you ever have any questions, asking us, we are here to help on that. And then the last one is legal expense trust fund contributions. This one is pretty complicated and not a lot of people use it, but there are some public officials that do need to establish one to assist in paying legal expenses incurred from like legal proceedings that relate to their official duties. If you ever have any questions about this one, you have to create it through us. So you would have to come to us anyways about that, but we do like to make that clear. All right. So now we're going to go ahead, now that we've kind of looked at prohibited use of office, and see if we can spot the prohibited use of office violations. I'm going to go ahead and read them one by one. And it's just, again, if you think it's a violation, thumbs up. If you think it's not a violation, thumbs down. So number one, using your committee contacts to share about your private consulting firm's new funding initiative. Do we think that's a prohibited use of office violation? Yeah, yes, that definitely is. Again, we only have access to those because of our position. So using them to help our own private consulting firm is a prohibited use of office. Okay, second, promoting your book while speaking at an event in your committee member capacity. Is that also a prohibited use violation or not? Yeah, yes, that one again. We are only at this event because we are a committee member. That's the only reason we are here, and promoting our book would be, again, using a prohibited use of office violation. So now number three, accepting a $25 gift card for being a speaker at an event. That a prohibited use of office violation or not?
Would that be dependent on whether or not it was an honorarium or agreed to prior to the speaking?
Yes, exactly. So we would assume that in this case it was an honorarium, just because we didn't give those details, but that is a detail you need to know yourself, because if you had decided on that beforehand, it does not count as an honorarium and it would be a use of office violation in that case. But if they just gave it to you afterwards as a thank you without you knowing, you are allowed to accept it as an honorarium.
Thank you.
Okay. So the biggest things to remember about prohibited use of office is that we cannot, as public officials, we cannot use our position to gain a financial benefit or avoid a financial detriment if the opportunity would not be available but for holding their public position. This also means that a public official cannot use public money, equipment, or other resources for personal activities, which we'll talk a little bit about with private employment. But this, even if the result is not a cost for the public body. So one thing we run into a lot is, say your public body is meeting and you want to have like coffee and donuts, right? And someone has a Costco membership and they're like, oh, it's cheaper here. I'll just go grab it under my Costco membership, save them money, right? The problem is you get rewards for your Costco membership. And so if that's your own personal account, that's going to be a prohibited use of office violation, because you only have access to the rewards points because you're doing it for your capacity as a public body member. So even though it technically probably saved like if the donuts and coffee were cheaper at Costco, that would technically save the money. It is still a prohibited use of office violation. So let's go ahead and read this and we'll decide if it's a conflict of interest, a prohibited use of office, or both. Because like I said, those two do typically get intertwined. So the situation is that your live-in boyfriend works for an organization that operates in multiple fields. The organization has a wildlife program that applies for committee funding. Your boyfriend works in a different program that involves city planning and will not receive the funding. You are voting on recommending funding for the wildlife program of that organization. So first off, do we have a conflict of interest? What does everyone think? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. See a couple. Yeah. Okay. So conflict of interest, we have to, one, have an official action. We got that. Two, it has to have a financial impact. So it would have a financial impact on that business. But third, is that a business with which we are, or a relative are associated with? No, because a live-in boyfriend is not considered a relative and conflict of interest does not apply to household members. So this actually would not have a conflict of interest. However, though, because prohibited use of office is associated with household members, we would be giving a benefit to a business with which a household member is associated. So there is a prohibited use of office violation there. Now, if we just changed it a little bit and said this was our spouse instead of our live-in boyfriend, then we would have both because they are defined as a relative. So this is just a really good example of how the different things going on, like different circumstances, those tiny little details that you think might not matter actually do change on whether a law, how it applies. So, okay, and we're going to really quick look at private employment. This is a, oh, there is a hand up. Someone have a question?
I was just gonna say that's archaic definition of spouse, because you're implying that they have to be married for this to matter. And like, I don't know, I'm sure some people who know me well are laughing right now, but it's just,
yeah, no, we have
ridiculous.
a lot of conversations about that in the office, especially how just the fact that conflicts of interest doesn't apply to household members where prohibited use of office does. You would think it would.
Yeah.
But that is where we run into, we just have to, we have to enforce the law as it is. So
Yeah, okay. Well, good to know.
And we have had legislative changes proposed to make the laws match each other more closely. They just haven't been approved to go in front of the legislature. So we keep trying, and we'll keep trying until we make things a little bit easier and more cohesive.
Okay, so yeah, private employment, it is technically a part of prohibited use of office. We just like to pull it out because it is one that a lot of people have questions about. So the Oregon government ethics law does not prohibit public officials from owning a private business or working for a private employer while continuing employment with or holding a position with a public body. Like we said before, out of those 260,000 public officials, many are volunteers, meaning there's little or no compensation. So the ethics law doesn't in no way say that you cannot have private employment. But there are some things we need to follow just to make sure we aren't having a prohibited use of office violation. So the first is that we cannot use the position held as a public official to create the opportunity for additional personal income. And then we must ensure a clear distinction between the use of our personal resources and time for that personal income producing activity and the use of our public body's time and resources. So making sure that those are very distinct in when we are spending time, money, and resources on our private activity versus when we are acting in our public official capacity. And then also the law also prohibits us from directly or indirectly soliciting or accepting future employment based on the understanding that the offer is influenced by a public official's votes, actions, or judgments. So you couldn't have, like, if someone was proposing a grant before you and said, oh, by the way, if we can get this funding, we might have a position open up. We think you'd be really good for it. They're trying to make it sound very nice, but in fact, that would be a prohibited use of office violation because they're basically insinuating that that offer is based on whether your vote as a public official goes through or not. So that would be one example. Now we did, because we get a lot of questions about this, we have our guide for public officials, which I'm pretty sure Andrew shared with you previously, but we also have that available on our website, and you can always ask us for it as well. But we have these 5 guidelines that we like to say you should pay attention to when participating in private employment. And those are using no governmental body time, using no governmental body resources, taking no official action that could financially impact your private business, and then using no confidential information obtained through your public official role, and disclosing all conflicts of interest. So pretty self-explanatory, but again, just making sure there's really that distinction. And then typically you would see a lot of conflict, using that confidential information or taking that action, you would typically see those conflicts of interest come up. But using that confidential information is where you'll see that prohibited use of office violation. So those are kind of the 5 things you want to remember when considering private employment, And then private employment does have a specific provision related to contracts and subsequent employment. So a public official who is authorized meaning played a significant role in a public contract, cannot legally work under that contract for a period of 2 years from the date of authorization. Now, I don't think this will really, from what I saw, what the committee does, I don't know if this will apply to all of you as much, because grants do not count as contracts. So you do not have to worry about that. Those are not considered contracts. But some of the other things you may be doing, if it is a contract and you are playing a significant role in that, you cannot work for that contract for 2 years. And further defining that significant role, would be things like selecting the contractor, executing the contract, recommending approval, signing the contract, or serving on a selection committee. So let's go ahead, consider those guidelines. So if we are serving as a member of the committee and we accept a new position with one of the companies that recently accepted a grant, what are the 5 guidelines for ensuring we don't violate ethics law? Anyone want to chime in if they remember from that slide? There's a lot, so we'll go over them together, but if anyone remembers, feel free to join in. Okay, I'll go over them. So we need to make sure we're not using governmental body time. We're not using governmental body resources. This does include our colleagues. So making sure that you are not discussing things with colleagues from the committee about your private business and employment. We can take no official action that could financially impact our private enterprise. We cannot use confidential information obtained through our position, and we have to disclose all conflicts of interest. So again, things that you would, as you're considering conflicts of interest and that permitted use of office, you would kind of consider those already, but just really making sure you have that distinction when you are having that role as a public official and also doing the private employment. So, okay. So I know that we only talked about use of office and the conflicts of interest today, but it is a good reminder that this is only a portion of Oregon government ethics law. So if you do ever have any questions about nepotism, gifts, or even that SEI statement, you can reach out to us and we can always schedule another training. We hold monthly webinars on a lot of this as well. But I did kind of want to go through just kind of our complaint process and everything. So, because a lot of people after we, show all these things are like, what happens if I do, like, if there has been a violation, how does it work on your end? So we have to follow, if a complaint is submitted that is within our jurisdiction, we do have to open it up and look into it. That being said, we don't accept anonymous complaints. They do have to be assigned. And then once we receive a complaint and it's opened, it goes into preliminary review where investigators get kind of the basic facts of what went on, get testimonies from both sides, that kind of thing. And then it'll be presented before the commission, and they'll decide if whether there's enough evidence that, yeah, we need to investigate if a violation did occur, or there's not enough evidence, so let's dismiss. For those that do move into investigation, they have preliminary review takes about 60 days. Investigation's about 180 days, but then it's a further investigation, getting more information, any details we might have missed, that kind of thing. And then ultimately coming before the commission again and saying, okay, here's the evidence. Did they commit a violation or not? Only the commission itself can decide if a violation has occurred. So something to be aware of. But, and if a violation has occurred, if they do decide that, there are you may be subject to sanctions. So you can see here are civil penalties, maximum and everything there. We do have a penalty matrix depending on like how many times has this person made a violation, what were the costs involved, that kind of thing. That being said, our biggest mission at OGEC is education. So especially for people that, it's their first violation, or they, let us know that they've never had training on that kind of thing. We do prefer to put out letters of education or even like requirements of, hey, instead of paying this fee, come take a training with us by this date, that kind of thing. So just to let you know, that's what happens with the complaint process. But again, before it gets to that process, we always recommend reaching out to us. We actually have 3 levels of advice, which each offer a different level of safe harbor protection. So you can have like staff advice, staff opinions, and commission advisory opinions. The only thing to know about commission advisory opinions, where those are the most official, they're the ones signed by the commission themselves. Those ones do take 60 days. So if you did want that level, we do need a little bit of time there. But again, we take that phone, email, in person. We're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So that's what we're here for. But yeah, other than that, do we have any other questions about conflicts of interest or prohibited use of office that Steph or myself could answer?
Well, Alex, I just want to thank you and Stephanie for your time today. It's been very informative. I learned a lot. There were some things that I thought that were not true and some things that I didn't think would apply that certainly do. So I also appreciate, I think we all do, your willingness to answer individual questions about, certain situations that may arise. So thank you for that.
Of course. Thank you. We very much enjoyed being here. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties at the beginning. But I do have that information if you ever need to reach Steph or myself directly, or just our main email, that's all there. But you can also just Google us, find us. But thank you. Oh, yeah. And then Stephanie shared the resources in the chat, too. So some of our handouts and things like that. Yeah. But if you ever need anything, just get in touch with us. And thank you again so much. You guys were great.
Thank you, Lex. Those resources provided in the chat are very helpful if anybody hasn't taken a look at those yet. Some really cool handouts that go in detail on that. So thank you.
Well, thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that, our next agenda item is closing comments and meeting wrap up. So we'll open the floor now to the committee, and anybody have anything they'd like to say? Comments, questions? Okay. Well, I think just to kind of recap what we went over, we did agree that we're going to try to disperse the whole 10 million as we had agreed on prior, right, Andy?
Correct.
And we're going to work on some of the review criteria and how we're going to split up those 74 applications amongst the committee. And that may be through a subcommittee or maybe just working one-on-one. I know Mark had volunteered some of his experience with OCRF and others. We will also follow up on some of that in the chair meeting that Kristen and I have scheduled with you and Sarah later in the week.
Correct.
All right.
Sounds
with
good.
that, if there's nothing else, guess we can give everybody back an hour of their afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chad.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Andy.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Sarah.